Have you ever found yourself doubting your abilities, replaying mistakes, or feeling like you're your own worst enemy? That's the work of the inner critic, a voice that many of us know all too well. But what if you could take control of that voice, transform it, and use it as a tool for growth instead of a barrier? Today, we're joined by Natalie Grimes, a licensed master social worker, who has made it her mission to help people not only understand their inner critic, but also to shift the narrative and reclaim their power. In this episode, we're diving deep into actionable strategies, from naming your inner critic to building mindful techniques that work in real time. Whether you're navigating the pressures of the tennis court or the boardroom, stick around because by the end of this episode, you'll walk away with tools to quiet the self-doubt and step into your most empowered self. Let's get started.
All right, Natalie Grimes. So happy to have you here. This is probably going to drive our listeners a little insane because your name's Natalie, my name's Natalie. So we might have to say Natalie Luke here or Natalie Grimes here as we go through this interview. And so I'm happy to be here to talk about the inner critic. Just to kind of dive right into it, I'd like to start by sharing how I came to know my inner critic. Tennis court. It was such a profound experience for me, and you and I have chatted about it before this interview. And I actually came to name my inner critic Natasha. And if there's any Natashas out there, this is just the name of my inner critic. Natasha, I came to know Natasha as I was playing tennis, and Natasha said to me, "Don't miss that ball. Come on. You missed it before. Don't miss it this time." And what I'd like to do is maybe if you could share from your perspective on why naming and understanding your inner critic is such a powerful first step in understanding the inner critic.
Yeah, absolutely. Naming your inner critic is very important. It's part of it is labeling. And when we learn to label and distinguish ourselves from our negative thoughts, our negative core beliefs about ourselves, we gain a little control over them. We start to feel in charge of who is talking. We can start separating ourselves, as well as we can start to shun them away a little bit, right? We can put them in the back of our mind and go, "No, thanks, Natasha, not today, not doing that." But they do serve a purpose, and we do listen to them when we label them when it's appropriate as well.
And so when might it be appropriate?
It's a good question. A lot of the times our inner critic comes out when we're kids, right? So it's that little voice that says, "Hey, you can't do that," or "Hey, that's not good enough," or so on and so forth. And as we get older, that voice kind of evolves into safety concerns. For some people, it's as big as trauma, where that inner critic says, "Don't stand up, you can't do it, they're not going to listen to you," and that kept them alive, right? So that might be a survival mechanism for a lot of people. As we kind of learn we are okay, or we don't really need to listen to that critic, we start to kind of put her aside, put him aside, whoever they are, and determine for ourselves, do I need to listen to this voice right now? And that's what being mindful is.
That is awesome. Can you go a little bit deeper into being mindful?
Yeah, of course. So being mindful is really kind of just that. It's not taking too much action. It's not really doing anything with the information we have. It's simply just kind of sitting back, observing what's happening. So when you talk about a tennis court, I imagine your adrenaline's pumping because you've been moving, you're racing. I mean, you talked about that. So part of that is taking a step back and going, what's happening with my body? What's happening with my mind? What's happening with my spirit, if you so choose and are inclined to tune into that? And being mindful is, again, coming back full circle to just labeling. Right? I need to be mindful of how I feel right now, which is anxious. I feel disappointment in myself, some shame, some guilt, maybe pride, maybe joy, maybe grandiose, doesn't really matter. And then you kind of go from there and reel it in, or kind of prompt yourself back up if you need.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm talking to my friends about Natasha, right? I'm like, to my partner, "I am so sorry, Natasha's here right now." I'm like haunted by Natasha, but don't worry, it'll be okay. And I tell, it's a for fun league, and I tell my friends about Natasha, and they are all laughing. The next time I came out to the court, they're like, "Oh, is Natasha here today?" I'm like, No, we're not talking to Natasha today, but I was going to serve and I was serving deuce, which means you're tied. And then if you lose that point, then you get to play one more. And if you lose that point, the game's over. And I'm playing deuce and Natasha shows up and says, you better not double fault. And that's what I did. I double faulted. That means my two serves were out. And so I went to the ad side to play the next point, whereas if I win that point, I get to have a new deuce. And I said to Natasha, thank you for being here, but I don't need you. What I really need is Natalie 2.0. That's next year's version of Natalie's tennis playing. And I thought to myself, what would Natalie 2.0 be feeling right now? Not thinking, not what she would do, but what she would be feeling. And I thought to myself, well, Natalie 2.0 would have her spine straight up, her eyes focused on that court. And when she tosses up this ball, she's going to hit the ball at the highest point that she possibly can. And that sucker's going in, and that ball is not being returned. And I'll tell you what, it worked. And it worked the next time, and I won that game. Can you talk a little bit about what might have been happening there?
Well, for the start of that, when you had mentioned your friends had asked you, is Natasha coming out today? That makes it real, right? And that holds you accountable, and it makes it a little funny, which is kind of what we all need during those really tensionful times. Is I need to laugh about this critic I have in the back of my mind. She needs to be funny or else I'm going to lose it. The other thing that I think probably really worked for you is you stopped, you slowed down, you recognized I can't make this other mistake. And it's not because this inner critic is telling me I'm not good enough. It's not because this inner critic is telling me, if you do X, Y, and Z are happening. It's because you didn't want it to happen. And you took back that control in that moment, it sounds like. As well as you took that mindfulness and you turned it into action. I'm going to straighten back up. I'm going to hit the ball at the highest point. I'm going to make sure I follow my techniques, and I'm going to make sure I do what I want to execute. I think that was a really good example of it because it's hard to do it in that type of moment, especially when you're playing sports, you're competitive. It's hard.
Yeah. So let's take it to the work environment now. After I labeled Natasha, right now in my everyday 9-to-5 job, I'm managing some really complex projects. And these are very hairy projects, a lot of steps, a lot of people, none of which I have direct authority over. Well, maybe one, but the rest I do not. And so it's really managing through relationships and that sort of thing. And I got a compliment from another senior leader saying, hey, this project's been the best. And, you're really at this point in time doing a great job, far better than you did before. And I thought to myself, what?
Great.
I didn't hear that you're doing a great job. What I heard is better than before. Like, what did I do in the past? So what do you think could be going on there?
Yeah, that's a fun one. So that is that inner critic kind of coming to play because it's hyper focused, right? It's everything was really good, like you said, and then what didn't I do right? What happened? And that a lot of the times that's when we start to tune into our faults because we start to feel that flutter. We start to feel like we kind of have to go into survival mode for a second. That was a threat. That meant something could happen to me. That meant something might not happen that I want to happen. So I have to tune into it. And that's fine. That's super normal. We don't get to control our thoughts. We don't get to really decide, am I going to be reactive to this? Is this going to elicit some sort of response from myself? That's not up to us. I wouldn't have a job. I say that all the time. If people could control their thoughts, I wouldn't have a job. The problem is we get to decide what we do with that. So when we choose to sit and be mindful and hyperfixate on that part, we lose the compliment. We lose all the good things, or we lose the ability to go, what do you mean? Without it being an attack or too personal. Right. I think that's what happened.
Yeah. And it's funny that you went, because it did sound like a record just like being scratched. And at
Mhm.
that particular situation, I had to go back and say, okay, what did you mean? So I didn't get hyper focused on it.
It's hard though. It's really hard in that moment.
Yeah, it is. It's scary to ask the question too, because the guy was afraid of the answer.
Yeah, because what would that answer mean? Do I not get to feel that good moment anymore? Do I have to do better? Is that inner critic going to get louder? What does this mean?
Yeah, exactly. So how can someone identify when they're dealing with the inner critic as opposed to being really maybe self-reflective or cautious? Like, what are the signs to be looking for?
Ooh, that's a good question. How do I know the difference between this is my inner critic and I am being reflective? That's a really good question. Well, when your critic comes out, it tends to take over, right? So part of that mindfulness is, am I losing what's happening around me? Am I only hearing that voice? Am I able to step out and challenge that? So for like you, for example, when you heard that statement and you're like, what happened? Talked about that record needle going. I imagine in that moment from the way you describe it, it was kind of like nothing else existed. We
Uh-huh.
were just thinking about that. So that's one way we know that inner critic is taking over. We have physical symptoms. I mean, our chest gets tight. We start to sweat. We get like that needlepoint vision where all we can see is like what's in front of us. And it's helpful to tune into that and go, okay, what's happening in my body right now? And why did that take me down such a deep, dark circle for a second? You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh. Kind of like a wormhole,
Wormhole.
not a rabbit hole, a wormhole.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's, I think I'll repeat that a lot because part of this is just, it's really hard, you know? And it's not always about, pardon me, it's not always about not having the thought or not feeding the critic. It's about how do I come back from it? I think that's really the most important part is how do I repair from this moment? Because sometimes it just gets away from us. You know, sometimes we have trauma, sometimes we have repetitive experiences. Sometimes it just didn't feel good and we don't want to not feel good for a second because we're human. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the other things we talked about in the past, you and I, is what are some common thought patterns? Because, like, for example, when I was thinking about Natasha on the tennis court, I'm like, if I don't play good, if I don't play well, then I'm not going to be asked to play, and people aren't going to want to play with me, and then I'm not going to be playing tennis at all. Like, I went down this wormhole
Mm-hmm.
there. What are some common thought patterns that fuel that inner critic or that inner critic feels those thought patterns? And how do they differ from constructive self-evaluation?
Yeah. So what you're describing is errors in thinking, right? It's a distortion, a distorted way of thinking, which again, like we talked about earlier, can serve a purpose sometimes. Catastrophizing is what you did, right? Where you went to worst case scenario. If I don't play well today, then X, Y, and Z are for sure going to happen. And the truth is, they probably would have given you a break, right? They probably been like, oh, Natalie had an off day. Oh, Natasha's a little too loud. What's going on? It probably wouldn't have been that big of a deal. We can't say for sure that we can't future tell, which would be another one of those errors in thinking, right? And that's a difficult one. And then also in there, I heard jumping to conclusions, which all kind of sound similar. You know, they're under that umbrella of trying to control what's happening, trying to predict the future. If I plan for this, then this won't happen. And the truth is, when we start to do that, when we start to catastrophize, again, we're trying to serve a purpose, but right then it's not helpful because you just get in your own head. You just start thinking about that worst case scenario. You start fixating on it, and ultimately you create it a lot of the times.
It's like Natasha when she gets there and I really embody her. Oh my God, that is like, I cannot play.
Mhm.
Everything's tight. It's horrible.
That's how those negative thoughts survive, right? You're the host and they need that rumination. They need that to survive. So really they're trying to survive too. And that's again, what a lot of this comes back down to. But the truth is the more you feed it and the more you kind of collide with it. And I wish I had two hands available since I'm doing this on my phone to give you the little physical representation that I usually do with us. Yep. You have a thought, can't control it. You label your feeling, scared, shame, whatever. And if they collide, they become a behavior.
Exactly. So the question is, how do you stop them from colliding?
Quick break, everyone. If you're enjoying this episode, remember to download it for offline listening and share it with your friends or network. Sharing helps us reach more ambitious listeners like you. Want to take your growth to the next level? Join our membership program for just a few dollars a month and gain exclusive benefits designed to support you. Early access to episodes, bonus content, and even a say in future topics. Don't just listen, be part of the journey. If you're a woman aiming for management, but stuck in the experience trap, listen up. You're talented, ambitious, but hitting a wall. You need experience to get a management role. But how do you get that experience? Introducing UnCeiling Your Career, the book that's breaking the experience trap. Discover how to showcase your leadership potential, even without prior management experience. Transform your project skills into leadership assets and build a strategic career path. Ready to climb the ladder? Grab the book, UnCeiling Your Career, today, at any place you prefer to purchase books, and start your journey to the top.
Yeah, it's not a perfect system. That's kind of a brutal answer to that. But the other part is putting something in between, right? Is recognizing I can change how I'm thinking. I can't do anything about the fact this thought entered my brain, but I can do something with it if I so choose. For some people, that's meditation. For some people, that's prayer. For some people, that's just kind of having a few good cognitive challenges in the back of their brain. Like when I hear in my inner critic say, "You're not good enough," I counter with, "That's okay. I don't have to be good enough right now. I'm learning. I am teachable. There are things I can do to improve upon this." And sometimes having those in the back pocket can be really helpful.
Ah, that's nice. And so for me, it was recognizing that Natasha's there and challenging Natasha, like you said, separating her from me and saying, okay, enter Natalie 2.0.
Yeah. And, for some people, it's different for every situation too, right? Like if you're in the split second of a tennis court, you probably can't just break open your Bible or break open your meditation book and say, "Hey, hold on one second, let me go get a glass of water." Like, it's probably not doable. So you have to be able to adapt those techniques to different situations, right? So at work, if you get another passive aggressive comment or you get a comment that doesn't sit right with you, even if it wasn't meant to be that way, you have some more time. You can reflect and, like you said, go back and ask a clarifying question.
Yep, exactly. And I love it. So like emotions tend to be tied to the inner critic. You mentioned a few earlier, and how can we question or challenge those emotions?
Yeah, shame and guilt are the biggest ones, I think. You get embarrassment in there a lot of the times. We have a fear as humans. We don't want to be embarrassed, so we avoid going out and doing something new or taking a risk, going out on that date, applying for that job. We don't want to feel like a fool. We don't want to feel like we wasted someone's time. I would say those are probably the biggest ones, is shame and guilt. And just to put, like, for people who maybe those two terms get confusing, guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is something is wrong with me, right? A little bit of shame, a little bit of guilt is healthy. We want those things to kind of remind ourselves not to repeat our history. The problem is when we attach those to who we are, is that we fall into those and we become them.
So really, it's for me, I know Natasha's there on the tennis court when I recognize my thoughts, but when I'm at work, I think it's, I know Natasha's there when I feel shame when I shouldn't feel shame, or guilt when I shouldn't feel guilt. If something happened and I was not the cause of it, sometimes I immediately start to feel guilty, like I should have done something to see it, like see the future and stop it. So I think that is how I personally am identifying when Natasha has entered the scene.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And that should statement, that one takes a lot of people down. I should be doing better. Why? Why should you have? That's a question to ask yourself. And if you could have, you would have. Can you do attention?
Yeah, and there was something related to should, because we were talking about storms.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we know is that it does storm outside. Storms come in.
Mm-hmm.
And every now and then I will have a should storm with myself or a shit storm with myself. And so then the question is recognizing when it comes in and putting out my umbrella. And my umbrella are those thoughts that shield me from the shoulds.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful, visualization of that, is that I can protect myself from myself. That is true control and power over yourself.
I think that's a fantastic tool that people can really use and help themselves through those storms. So how we talked about keeping some of these thoughts and these feelings separate. And can you say just one more time why it's really crucial when dealing with the inner critic to keep those thoughts and those feelings separate so you have some space?
Yeah. Keeping them separate, again, just as a reminder to everybody, is not a foolproof system. We don't always nail this skill, but the reason we really want to keep our negative core beliefs, our self-critic separate from who we are is because it's not who we are, right? We're human. We're allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to be a little imperfect. So when we attach these negative beliefs to ourselves, that's who we become in our eyes. And it becomes harder and harder and harder for the people in our lives who are saying, no, you are doing a great job. Or, oh my God, look at this thing you just built, designed, created. And for us to attach worth to that. So when we attach these negative beliefs, the self-critic, when we let her voice get too loud, we get her too close to us, we no longer have worth because we're not used to hearing that anymore. And we've fallen out of practice with that good self-talk that would really validate and enforce the things we need and the appropriate should believe in ourselves for.
Right. I think that is so critical. So what kind of mind shifts can we use or practice to get to that point where we separate Natasha from Natalie?
Well, one thing I love that you do is journaling. You write things down. I feel like every time I see you, you come with a new diagram, a new plan of action for how I'm going to achieve this goal I have. And there's a lot of power in that. Part of it is when we write things down throughout the day, I felt this. Okay. I wonder why I felt that. You have it on paper. You can come back to it. You can compare it to other examples. You can also sit there with it and choose to put it away if you need to, if that makes sense. You don't have to deal with everything right away. You're allowed to put it away and go, I don't have the capacity. I'm not going to deal with it right now. I will come back to it. Another thing, part of when you come with these diagrams and you've planned of action, you've come with solutions, which always blows my mind. I love it. Is you're also practicing what I call East Coast to West Coast. You're practicing the skill of, I've now given myself new ways of thinking about myself, opposed to just this one bad way. So if you're traveling from Jersey to California and you're only allowed to take one road across the country, you're going to hit roadblocks, you're going to hit traffic, you're going to hit all kinds of issues. It's going to take about 3 weeks to get there, right? However, the more ways of thinking, the more positive self-talk, the more coping skills, the more practice with mindfulness, the more effort into seeing our self-worth, we now have a bunch of scenic routes to get from A to B, from East Coast to West Coast, and it doesn't take nearly as long, and we enjoy the ride.
I think that's a fantastic analogy. So really practicing all of these different skills, maybe one doesn't work today, but another works tomorrow. And then you can always come back to the first one and maybe it'll work again. I think that's great. So if someone's just beginning to notice their inner critic for the first time, what's one piece of advice that you would give them to start their journey towards a more balanced and empowering inner dialogue?
Oh, that's also a great question. Well, yeah. One, I would say therapy. It's always helpful to have a non-biased party there to kind of go, see what you just did there? Or, hey, you're doing that thing again? That's helpful. But if that's not for you, or maybe we're just not there in that journey yet, and you're just kind of learning who she is, he is, they are, whatever it is, I would say the best thing is to notice when they come out. Pay attention to patterns. Pay attention to when is this voice becoming the loudest? When is it easiest for me to kind of shush them off to the side? And figure out, work it from there. What does this mean? Are they trying to protect me? Are they trying to shame me? Does it sound like somebody I know? That's where I would start, is looking at the pattern.
Excellent. So as the audience can tell, I do work with a therapist who is named Natalie Grimes, and it's been very empowering, and I recommend it for anybody who has ambition and who has imagination, because it just helps you with your ambition and imagination. As we talked about from Jennifer, new level, new devil. As you grow, you got a new devil to contend with. That's when your inner critic is definitely going to come out. So Natalie, if someone wants to find a therapist, what are some of the ways that they can go about finding a therapist?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the back, if you have insurance, if that's something you have, on the back of your card, you have a mental health number, and they will connect you with anybody in your area within whatever mile distance you give them. You can call 211 United Way, and they will set you up, they'll refer you out to people in your area. Say if you don't have insurance, they might have free resources, support groups in the area, things like that. Your insurance card really is the best way to go, because then it covers all your answers. I would say this though, don't be afraid to go through a few therapists. It's kind of a bad analogy, but it's like dating a little bit, where you have to find the person that suits you. You feel heard, you feel validated, it's not awkward. And as a therapist myself, I always try to acknowledge I'm a complete stranger that you're about to tell a bunch of personal information to. And as long as you feel safe with that, that is when you know it's time to start doing your healing and go to therapy.
Excellent. I really appreciate you stepping on here to talk about the inner critic. I think that this is one episode. I think it's going to help thousands upon thousands of people. So thank you so much for joining us, Natalie Grimes.
Thank you, Natalie Luke.
Before we wrap up, I just want to say there's so much power in naming and understanding our inner critic. For me, calling mine Natasha might get a few laughs, but it's been transformative. Why? Because acknowledging Natasha means I can also acknowledge Natalie 2.0, the version of myself that's focused, mindful, and ready to grow. And that's really what this is all about. Learning to use all parts of ourselves. The critic may show up with fear or doubt, but Natalie 2.0 is always ready to step in and say, thanks for your input, Natasha, but I've got this. It's not about silencing your inner critic completely. It's about learning to separate it from who you are and stepping into your fullest potential with clarity and confidence. I hope this episode has given you tools, insights, or maybe even a little nudge to start thinking about your own inner dialogue. Whether you're just starting to notice your inner critic, or you're ready to turn up the volume on your version of 2.0, know this: every step you take is progress. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, take radical responsibility for your life and watch the ripple effect unfold. Until next time, this is Natalie Luke 1.0 and 2.0 signing off. Stay ambitious, stay curious, and don't forget, you're on your way to 2.0. Ever find yourself trapped in the should storm after a bad meeting, conversation with a coworker, or a missed deadline? I should have done this. I should have said that. I should have seen that coming. It's exhausting, isn't it? In the unsealing zone, we've got you covered. I've created a powerful toolkit to help you break free from the storm. You'll get a step-by-step video, or if you prefer an MP3, you can listen to anywhere, and a transformative worksheet to turn shoulds into lessons learned. So you can move forward protected from your inner critic, confident, and ready to crush your next project. Join the unsealing zone today and start taking radical responsibility for your growth. Click the link in the show notes to grab your tools. Your journey starts now.